Welcome back to day one of the 10th annual Toronto Raptors Coaches Open House presented by Tangerine. I'm Sherman Hamilton. After each session, we're going to have a pop quiz. It's going to be a lot of fun, so make sure you're paying attention. And we'll put the information on the screen. You can follow along on your phone, and the person that answers the questions the fastest and correctly will win. So, yes, speed and accuracy matters in this situation. And the winner who gets all those answers correct will get a signed Raptors jersey. So, follow along and have a lot of fun. All right, let's get into it. Joining me today is Jim Sann, assistant coach for the Toronto Raptors, and he was part of the 2019 NBA Championship Raptor run. Jim Sann is in his second stint with Toronto Raptors. His first stint was in 2003-2004 under head coach Kevin O'Neill. He has spent more than 2 decades holding various roles in the NBA. Jim, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, Sherman. Good to see you, man. I think the last time I saw you live was in Salt Lake City in the weight room at the Grand America. It's been a while. And for everybody out there, I don't think I've ever been in the weight room where he hasn't been on the road where Sherman hadn't been in there. So he's a hard worker in there.
Hey, I'm trying to keep up with you, Jim. You're setting a great example, as usual. But Jim, today we want to talk about young athletes, and that's going to be our focus in terms of this discussion. And we want to discuss, first of all, when you're approaching a young athlete, when you think about a young athlete, what makes a young athlete tick? What makes them go? What makes them want to be involved in sports from your perspective?
Well, I think from a coaching perspective, and as far as where you're trying to get them to go, I think there's two things you really have to think about in the big picture. One of them is you have to teach your young players, your kids, to love the game, because that's where it's all going to start. That's where it's all. From that area is where everything they do in the game of basketball is going to start. They have to be taught in general how to love the game, and there's different ways to go about that. We can get into more detail. The second thing is you have to teach them how to work, and that's different for everybody. But I think the one of the core values that you're trying to teach your players is a work ethic, and because that's going to translate not only to the game of basketball but into life in general. And being able to push yourself and learning a work ethic and a consistency about how you approach the game of basketball hopefully has a carryover to other aspects of their life. And the last thing that I think comes from that, and I think is certainly as important, if not more important than a lot of the things we're teaching our kids, and that's confidence in themselves, confidence in their teammates, and confidence in their coaches. Confidence is a skill that has to be developed. And as you go about your training with your players and your practices and maybe your individual sessions with them, maybe your own kids, is having them leave the floor a little bit more confident than they were when they got on the floor that day. It could be a little smidgen, and I think that's what grows their passion for the game. Whether they're going to be a professional athlete, a high school athlete, a rep team, I think instilling those three things I think is really important, and I think that's what makes athletes tick. Especially younger guys and girls that maybe haven't had the experience and are doing it for part of the first time, and are on a path, and those early days are critical to get them to continue on that path, because not just as a basketball player, but as a individual.
Definitely. And Jim, when you think about a young player and kind of the things that you just talked about in terms of getting them and finding out what makes them tick, a lot of times at young ages, it's tough to strike that balance between development and winning. Some people want to win right away. Some people believe the process of developing and winning being something that is a result of the development coming later down the road might be a better way to do it. So, how do you as a coach kind of balance strategically the winning as well as the development aspect of a young athlete?
Well, in general, I think this is really important. Um, One of the things that I try to develop, even with the Raptors, and I have a 12-year-old son, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old son. And one of the things that I think we try to develop with the Raptors, which is the highest level, and even all the way down to, down to a 12-year-old level, is developing the notion of being happy for a teammate's success. I think is really important, because that's what translates to winning. Because different people have different skill sets, different players have different skill sets, but developing that notion, and again, these are things that really could transfer into an office setting, to to maybe an emergency room, to different areas outside of basketball. But developing the notion that of being happy for a teammate's success, I think leads to winning. So I think that's one of the balances that you try to come up with as a coach, is developing that. Again, developing the love for the game, um, developing how to work on their core values. Those are the things that lead to winning. So there is a balance, but there's also sort of a sequence to development leading to winning. And like in other words, I think we've seen this at all levels. You could have a really good player, and if he can't get, like basketball's, there's five guys on five players on the court, and it's important for each player to, first of all, accept their role, but to develop that from the better players down, and the end of the bench players up, to develop that notion. I think is where the balance starts, where you develop, and then usually if you develop skills and you develop a work ethic and you develop that, the wins will come. The wins will come. So I think there is a balance, but I also think there's a connection.
Yeah, and obviously with younger players, that instilling that and planting those seeds of being happy for a teammate is something that if they can grasp that, that will definitely help them no matter what level they reach or attain in terms of whatever sport or, as you said, in life that they get to. Now, this time and this environment is very different, as you know, in terms of what the world is going through. And when you think about, kids coming to a practice, you want to make it safe. You want to make the environment as safe for them as possible on all levels. So when they come there, they can focus on what you're trying to teach them and not have all those other things. And, some kids are bringing a lot of different things into a practice based on what they've gone
Mm-hmm.
through or what their life entails. So how do you ensure that that practice environment is a safe environment for a kid?
Well, I know I'm it's a first of all, it's a really good question. I think it's on point, and I think it's really, really important. And one thing you have to, I think, really be mindful of is what these teams and what these players' teammates mean to them in their lives. And a lot of that was taken away due to this pandemic, rightfully so. It was a necessary step to keep everybody safe. But a lot of these teams, it's an outlet for these kids physically that there is not there right now. Or maybe it's coming back, but it wasn't there for some time. It's a social outlet. I know with my son, some of his best friends are the friends he's made on his basketball team, and that's, no, not, they're starting to get back together, and it's been a big help for him. So I think just being mindful of the fact that as adults, we can kind of process everything that's going on. We can process our own feelings a little bit better. We can process our sense of what is not there, but is coming back. And look, last time I took a psychology class, I was a freshman in college, about 35 years ago. So I'm certainly not a,
You don't have to
that's
go
not
there.
what
We don't
I
have to go with time frames.
do. But I think what I'm trying to say is that be mindful of that when you're dealing with your kids, and they may not be in a great place. And I think we as adults and we as coaches and we as mentors have to be mindful of that and help them get through this period in the world that you know like as adults, we know there are brighter days ahead. Like, we know that, at least that's how I feel. There are brighter days ahead for all of us, but it's harder for a child to grasp that. They're living in the now, and I think being mindful of that gives them will give them a safe space, will give them a sense of normalcy, and give them a chance to sort of have an outlet for everything that's been going on in the world. And I'm not trying to be pop 101, psych 101, but it's just how I feel.
No, those are valid points. Very good points as well. One thing that throughout my basketball journey, I'm sure through your basketball journey, you've realized is that coaches are always harping communication. It's all about communicating, letting people know on the floor where they need to be, talking to each other, encouraging each other, being able to critique each other as well. But one thing that communication or a level of communication that doesn't come into play all the time when discussing communication is body language. And
Hmm.
when we talk about young athletes, a lot of times body language can be misinterpreted. So how important
Right.
is it for you as a coach to be in tune with body language and really check those markers and see what's going on with a kid, not solely based on body language, but that as a part of the information that you're extracting from a young man or a young woman?
Well, again, I think it's first of all, I think it's highly important. I think body language is highly important because it is a way of communicating, and it is a way of letting someone know that you're in tune with what they're saying, that you're listening. And that, again, that goes off the basketball court too. That goes with your teachers, that goes with maybe your bosses, that goes maybe with your partner in life. Uh, and so it's something that I think is, again, like a learned skill that we can help our younger players with. And uh, and, and it happens with our players up with the Raptors, and it's something I correct guys with all the time, because many times they don't realize that they're doing it, and they don't realize the impact that it has. And again, like, we're teaching basketball skills, but especially for you younger coaches and you're with younger athletes, we're teaching life skills. And even with the Raptors, we're still teaching life skills. We have some guys that are young. They're in their 20 and they're 21, and they make mistakes, and they don't realize you know some of the things they do with their body language is it's it's not positive. And it's something that, again, is teachable and correctable, and it's also something that they can control. And there's certain things in basketball, and there's certain things in life that you can control, and there's certain things that you can't control. And that's a message I send to our guys here all the time, with the Raptors. Like, control what you can control. For example, if for our bigs, screening is a really important skill. It's not sexy. It's not doesn't make ESPN, doesn't make the top 20 or anything like that. Or what is it? I don't know what it is. Top 10 plays of the night. But it's important, and it is a thing that they can control every night. And that's you're going to make some shots and you're going to miss some shots. You can't really control that, but you control your effort. You can control your body language. You can control when a coach is looking at you or talking to you, that you look them in the eye. That when the coach is talking, you're not talking to your other teammates or tying your shoes. You know, maybe some of you guys out there, maybe you have a rule. And I've been worked for coaches in the NBA that they had a rule that when you walk onto the practice court, you have your shirt tucked into your shorts and your shorts tied, because it's a visual sign that you're ready to practice right now. some coaches don't care about that, have other things, have other keys. But these are all things that I think we can really instill in our younger players that will help them as they move forward. And they may, I think we all have things that we learned when we were kids, and we can pinpoint the person that taught us that. And it's something that I think will help them not only as players but as people.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, as a coach, how important is it for you to be aware of your body language and how that may be being interpreted by the player?
Uh, well, that's another good and actually interesting question, because certainly in the NBA, I'll use that example because that's what I'm most familiar with over the past X amount of years. I don't want to say how many years because I don't want to age myself, but it's been a while. Um, but one thing I tell our younger coaches is that we are responsible for the energy in the gym. That we're all, and we have road trips, and we have late nights, and we have early mornings, and we have game plans to do, and we have, a lot of stuff. And we all have personal lives, and sometimes our personal lives are going well, and sometimes they're not. But we have a responsibility to these players and to the organization in general, that we walk onto the court ready to go, with our energy right, with our body language right, with our intention. Like I really believe, this is what I believe as a coach, okay, that when it comes to basketball, that we walk onto the court with the intention of getting our guys, again, just a little bit better. Now we walk on there with a plan and with an understanding of what we're going to do and how we're going to get them better. And that comes with how you stand. That comes with the intonation in your voice. That comes with being prepared with what you're going to do, so you feel comfortable doing it and there's no indecision. Those are the type of things, coach, especially as you get a little bit higher in the developmental, whether it's high school or college or maybe even minor leagues or something like that, or even especially in the NBA. We have a responsibility to be out there with the right body language, with the right approach, with the right amount of preparation. And Sherm, like preparation is important it's highly important for coaches, because we can't expect our players to be prepared if we're not prepared, and they key in on that. And we can't expect them to be high energy if we're not high energy. We have to be leaders in that area, and they will follow you. Your players will follow you if that's the approach that you take. And again, not necessarily just for games and practices, but maybe for a job interview. Maybe they'll remember, this coach or that coach, was always told me to be prepared, and that message really stuck with me. So when I'm going to a job interview, I'm going to do some research on who I'm interviewing with, or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to put you in a position now of actually running a youth basketball practice, and for new players. And if you had 1 hour to basically run a practice, how would you spend that time? Just kind of in a loose way, walk us through how that 1 hour, in terms of having the ability to coach these young people, would kind of roll out for
Right.
you.
Well, so it's a little bit different than how we would do it with the Raptors. Like we have our practice, and then we have what we call pre-practice, and we do all of our development at different times, either before or after practice, and then we have our main practice. And the reason for that is there's such a variety of players, from Kyle down to, let's say, O'Shea, Kyle, who's been in the league forever and has multiple all-star appearances and multiple Olympic appearances, and is a champion, and really is playing big minutes, as opposed to a guy that's really trying to get in the rotation. So this wouldn't really apply for the Raptors. But the first thing I would do as a group when they come in, because this is what I believe in, is have everyone in your team form shoot. Shooting is by far the most important skill you can develop in this day of basketball. And I'm sure you guys all watched a lot of those NBA playoff games, and it got to the point where if you can't shoot, this is not 100% universal, but if you can't shoot, it's hard for you to get into a game. And you're seeing it over and over and over again with all this shooting on the floor. And the like when I came into the league years and years and years ago, you could get away with being a non-shooter. The rules were different. You could be a big, strong, athletic guy, and you could survive in the NBA doing that. And it's less and less now. And form shooting is something you should do, I believe, when you're fresh, when your mind is fresh, because it's really important. And the other thing I would say is, as a coach, and I'm getting off topic a little bit here, but as a coach, have an idea of what your keys are with your shooting. So for us, it's getting the ball to the right side of your body, getting your hand under the ball, keeping the ball straight, that type of stuff, and teach that stuff. I would encourage you guys to make your corrections on the form shooting, and whatever needs to be changed, to really lock in on that during that time, because it's the least sexy and the most important skill a basketball player can have. So I would start with that. The next thing I would do is probably go into some individual development, meaning some finishing at the rim, some ball handling, probably both at the same time. And then again, that's for each individual coach, how they want to teach that is going to be different. My feeling, and a lot of coaches' feelings, it's the less dribbles, the better. And a lot of that depends on the skill set of your players. But I think there is some room in there for some individual skill, also because it allows them to get loose without with a ball in their hand, basically. I think is the next thing I would do. The third thing I would do is have some group skill sessions, because again, basketball is played with 5 people on the court, and there's only going to be a certain number of them that can get their own shot. So when you have multiple players on the court at once, it develops a sort of team camaraderie and a team spirit and a collective spirit, and it teaches them how to pass the ball to each other. And it also lets your players know that passing and playing with each other is important to me as a coach. So I'm going to put that in there. So that's like, and I'm not talking about necessarily running through plays. I'm talking about running through whatever your offensive principles are, putting your players in there and teaching them how to pass the ball to each other. The next thing I would do is again, now we keep moving towards more of a live setting. The next thing I would do is some defensive drills, whether it's a zone, whether it's man, whether it's your help sequences, whether it's your rotations. And again, part of that is dependent on how old your players are and what they can grasp, where they are in the developmental path, and sort of what they can grasp. And then I think you got to play. I think you have to play, get up and down for conditioning. A lot of times what we do is we play, but sometimes we put the score at 90-90 with 3.5 minutes left and let them do an end of game situation. Play the last 3.5 minutes of a game. Sometimes we do a stops game where you don't get a score for a made basket, but you get a score for a stop. Especially we're a pretty defensive oriented team, so we play a lot of stops games. So you build that up basically across that hour. Now an hour is a short amount of time, so you may have to cut some of that out or cut some of that down. But that would be sort of the cadence of a practice for a youth team for me.
Awesome. And obviously, for an NBA team, as you with the Raptors described, it would be a bit different, but there's no question that there's similarities in the way that you would kind of coach up these young people as well. So I want to tie something back into what you said earlier in our conversation. You talked about
Mm-hmm.
confidence, and having players
Yeah.
walk off the court with just a little bit more, maybe a lot, but at least a little bit more. So when you
Hmm.
talk about developing important skills for young players, how do you develop that early on so that they are confident to continue to play the sport, to continue to build? Because as you said, sometimes confidence is all it takes for a player to understand they belong. And you see it at the NBA level as well. When confidence goes away for a bit, players turn into different people.
Exactly. So I'll give you an example of what we do with the Raptors a little bit, or certainly what I do as a coach. Um, One of the things we like to do is have our guys shoot. Shoot a lot of spot shots, especially our developing shooters. And what we do is track them, and we shoot. Let's say we shoot 100 shots, and today's Monday, and maybe they made, I don't know, 56. And the hope is, as you shoot more and more, maybe on Tuesday, now this was probably going to take place over more time. Maybe on Tuesday they make 58 and they beat their score from the day before. And then maybe by the end of the week they're at 64. And then maybe sometime at the end of next week they're at 68. And they can track their improvement so they know they're getting better, and there's a number they can look at to get better. One of the other things that we do, and this is like this is something that I do personally. I'm not sure anybody else on our staff does this, but a lot of times, if a guy misses the first shot of his set, we'll give him a mulligan, and maybe we'll do that 2 or 3 times, just so we can get his number up a little bit, because we're not really concerned with the number. We're concerned with the confidence level that we're trying to achieve with this player. That's more important than the number. So that's something you can do, maybe kind of moving forward a little bit in that area. The other thing is, and I've been guilty of this, and I've been at different times good with this. Try not to try to make whatever you're asking them to do appropriate for their skill level.
Mm.
You don't want to give them a move or some sort of concept that they're not able to grasp. So I think making it appropriate, with making it such that it's attainable, but not attainable and not impossible. Like, we want to push our players forward, but we want to do it methodically. We don't want to give them when we're breaking down their shot. We don't want to give them 6 things, because a player can't grasp 6 things, but you can give them 2 things, and I think that's something that they can work on and feel good about it. But if you're teaching them how to play, and if you're teaching them how to shoot, and their follow through is wrong, and their elbow is wrong, and their feet are wrong, and you try to fix, it's like if you try to fix all 6 of them at once, you're gonna be met with probably a lot of failure. But if you fix 1 or 2 of them, and then move on to the next 2, and then move on to the next 2, you can turn that player into a pretty good shooter. So not speeding up and fast tracking the process, and understanding it's a lot of hours to do this stuff. um, I think is one way, and instilling a belief in them, and letting them know that, I tell this to players all the time: never let anybody or anything put a cap on what you can achieve. You know, and that goes for every player, and that goes for every coach, really. Never let anybody say, you shouldn't be playing at this level, or you're never going to be a starter, or you're never going to be a rotation player, or anything like that. Never let anybody put a cap on what you can achieve as a player and a person, because I tell that to our guys all the time, and I tell that to my son all the time. And I think it's a signal that you believe in them, and believe. I heard this from a guy I coached with, and he played on those great Bulls teams. And I think this was what Phil Jackson was great at. Like, having faith in your players is having faith in your players, and faith in who they are and what they can be, is a really strong. It's a really strong emotion. When a kid feels like you have faith in them, it can carry them a long way.
Absolutely. Great advice there. And obviously, Phil Jackson knew what he was doing. I mean, a lot of times he
He
wouldn't call
did.
timeouts when coaches would say they would call a timeout. Phil trusted his players in some intense moments to really figure
Yep.
it out, and he trusted them to be who they were. All right,
Yeah, and it works.
now,
It's really interesting because it works. It works both ways. You trust your players, and your players trust you right back.
absolutely, absolutely. Nowadays, Jim, we see the individual workout. It's one of those things that is happening at a very young age. I mean, 5, 6, 7 year olds are doing individual training specifically for a particular sport. Do you think that it's important for young athletes to kind of mix it up and be involved in other sports, or are you okay with that specialization? Because the physical activities from many sports can be transferable. So are you more into play those sports, get all the experiences in the different sports, and then bring it to your sport?
I'm a big believer in that. First of all, sports, you know, it's at its core, it's supposed to be fun.
Hmm.
It's something that you should enjoy, and I think there's been a lot of studies that the more diverse you are in your life, your general happiness is increased. So I think for all these kids, that's the number one goal. It also, for example, I'll tell you, some of our guys when they were growing up were big soccer players, and you can tell by the way they move their feet that they have some
Hmm.
experience, especially some of the European guys that where soccer is big, and some of our African, the African players where soccer is big. You can kind of tell that their feet are just trained differently. Like they can really move their feet in a way that,
Yeah.
maybe a non-soccer player wouldn't. You know, you can see like there's always a football around in our gym, and you can see the guys that played quarterback in high school, like they're zipping that ball around the gym like at 100 miles an hour, and it's fun. It's fun for them, So I think that I do think that diversifying your you can have a specialty, certainly, especially if you want to advance yourself, and you feel as though maybe there's a scholarship on the horizon. But sports in general, first of all, you play all year. There's a certain amount. Part of it is you're around your teammates for most of the year, especially in high school and in maybe junior high, and and I think that's an important part of your how you socialize. Is through your
Yeah.
sports teams, and I think I think the diversification, um, as an athlete, and the skills you're creating and generating, there is absolutely carryover, one way or another. It may not be specific, um, but you know, uh, I know a lot of guys. Like I coached a guy named Charlie Ward, who won a Heisman
Mm, that's
uh,
right.
at Florida State. When he was in
Yep.
high school, he didn't have a spring sport, the baseball, as a ninth grader. The baseball coach asked him to play baseball, and he was all state in baseball. And then he won the Heisman in football, and he was a first round pick. So, so he's an extreme case. But there's Chris Childs was, I think he was a guy that played here. He was drafted in the first round to play baseball. Pat Connaughton with the Milwaukee Bucks, he was drafted in the first round
Hmm.
to play baseball, as was Danny Ainge, I think, to play for the Toronto Blue Jays, I think.
That's right.
Um,
Yep.
uh, so there's a lot of now those are uniquely skilled players. Like I'm not saying that's a norm, but I do think, to answer your question, I'm a big believer in being multi sports. Absolutely.
And obviously on the NBA level, these guys are supreme athletes. So they've played sports and they would be successful if they choose to play other sports. But on the Raptors, can you just give me an example of one Raptor who you know has played maybe multiple sports, or even your soccer example, where you see the direct impact in terms of how they play the game of basketball?
Well, I don't know specifically, and I wouldn't know the names of the teams or exactly, because I've never asked that question, to be honest with you. But it looks like it looks like Pascal had a pretty big background in soccer, because I see him dribbling the basketball with his feet all the time.
There you go.
And sometimes with other guys, like they just, they do the juggling with their feet and they kick the ball to each other. And then, there's a lot of that. I think they may have been doing some of that before the games. Can't really remember if that was part of their, like during the intros, they would do something with the ball where they're heading the ball. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
It looks to me like Matt Thomas and Kyle are two pretty high level golf players. I don't know exactly when but they certainly, they're certainly pretty high level golf players. It looks to me, and again, I don't know if he played competitively or if it was just a hobby, but it looks like Mark Gasol looks like he's pretty good at tennis. Now some of these are hobbies and some of these may be things they did growing up, but again, they're things that, clearly have, they've taken an interest in, and it's probably helped them as players, and it's probably playing basketball has probably helped them in their other sports.
Absolutely. Now, as a coach, Jimmy, I mean, you've coached on so many levels, and obviously you've taken information from different coaches along the way, coaches that you've either worked with, coaches that you admired, but even coaches that have coached you. So when you think back to coaches that you've played for, what made you like them so much, and what made them great coaches to you?
Well, it's interesting. There was a lot of people that I played for. It was a long time ago. I wasn't on that path, to being a professional athlete or anything like that. But I'd like to harp on the point that you just made, because I think it's important for the coaches on this call to kind of think about this, like, and you mentioned it, and I want to kind of harp on that a little bit. My first boss was Pat Riley, and my second boss was Jeff Van Gundy. And both of these guys, especially, I remember when I was working for Pat, Jeff was the third assistant, and I decided I really wanted to coach. I was done with all my playing stuff and with all of that, and I decided I wanted to coach. It wasn't something that I thought I would do growing up. I didn't have any aspirations really of being a professional athlete or anything like that. I didn't think I had the skill level, but I did think I wanted to be involved with the game on some level. And both those guys really took me under their wing. I'll never forget. And I saw Jeff, and I remind him of this all the time. I used to write him notes after the game with a tape, asking him questions about what went on in the game. And this is a guy that was working hours and hours and hours and hours, and he always took the time to answer my questions. And it's something that happened, probably about 30 years ago, and it's something that I'll never forget. So for you older coaches out there, just understand that the impact you can have, not just with your players, but with other coaches. And as you get older, instilling in them the values that you have so that they can instill those same values on the next generation of coaches. Because we're all learning from each other, and the coaching tree is a gift that really keeps on giving. And the sport of basketball can't survive without it. We really need to continue to preach these good values and these good habits to the next generation of coaches and to the next generation of coaches after that, so that sport and the world in general can continue to be a positive influence on these kids' lives. And I think that's, I really wanted to make sure I made that point, because I think it's really important that we as coaches understand where we fit and how important that we are, and not only how important we are, but how important we can be in the lives of these kids, and not just the athletes, also the coaches. So you older guys like myself, I take a lot of pride and a lot of time, and again, the reason I do that is because someone did it for me, and I do it for the next group of coaches, and hopefully they do it for the next group of coaches after that, and then we keep this thing going, and you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, but sports can't be one of them. Sports has to be the one place where the values that we want to teach our kids never changes, and that comes from the people on this call, instilling that in their players and instilling that in their coaches, and we keep doing it, and so it perpetuates itself. And I know I'm off topic on your question, Sherman, but I just really wanted to make sure I got that out there.
No, those are great words of advice. Hey, it's a circle of life. You pay it forward, right? We were given
Right,
something, we have a duty to pay it forward. And that's not only basketball, not only for basketball, that's for life in general and how we should be as a
right.
community in a society called this world. So, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. It's always great catching up with you. And
Yeah,
I
man.
know this is a unique time for you guys, but it also creates opportunities to be creative in terms of the approach to the game and how you kind of train players. And it's forcing everybody to look at basketball a bit differently and find ways to continue to move the needle forward. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's good to see you, man. Hopefully, I'll see you out on the road
Absolutely.
there one of these days.
Absolutely. See you in a gym near you, Jim, at some point, all right?
I know I'm going to be there. I know you're going to
I
be
know
there,
you
so I'll
will.
see you.
Absolutely. Great talking with you. All
Good to
right, I
see
want
you,
to
man.
thank Jim Sann for spending some time with us. We also want to send a big thanks to Tangerine because without them, this wouldn't be possible. We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Raptors Coaches Open House presented by Tangerine.